My parents gave money to my brother, covered his rent, and kept him from any responsibilities for years. When they retired, they told me to let him move into my house. I said no, and things escalated fast. I, a 28 male, grew up in one of those families where the favoritism was so obvious it could have been a case study in a psychology textbook. My older brother, Kevin, 31, male, was the golden child who could literally set the house on fire, and my parents would blame the matches for being too flammable. Meanwhile, I was basically the family afterthought, the, "Oh right, we have another kid," son. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I learned pretty early that there were two sets of rules in our house: Kevin's rules and everyone else's rules. Kevin could stay out until midnight on school nights because he was socializing and building important life skills. I had to be home by 8 p.m. because I needed structure. Kevin could quit every extracurricular activity he started because he was finding himself. I had to stick with band for 4 years, even though I hated the clarinet, because commitment builds character. The double standards were so blatant it was almost funny. Almost. Kevin wrecked my dad's car when he was 17, drove it straight into a mailbox while texting, and my parents bought him a used Honda 2 weeks later so he could learn from his mistake in a safer vehicle. I got a B+ on a chemistry test once, and my mom sat me down for a 2-hour lecture about wasted potential. B+. I still remember her disappointed face, like I had personally let down every ancestor in our family tree. School events were another joke entirely. Kevin would get average grades, nothing special, maybe a C++ average on a good semester. Every report card was celebrated like he had won a Nobel Prize. My parents would take him out for dinner, buy him something nice, tell him how proud they were of his effort. Meanwhile, I was pooling straight A's, and the most I ever got was a nod of acknowledgement. Once I made honor roll for the 6th consecutive semester, and my mom's response was, "Well, you're supposed to do well." Thanks for the enthusiasm, Mother. Holidays were always a production in the Kevin Show. Christmas morning looked like Santa had a personal vendetta against me. Kevin's pile of presents could block a doorway, while I would get maybe 3 or 4 practical items: socks, a calculator for school, gift cards to places I never went. One year, I got a toolkit while Kevin unwrapped a gaming console, the latest smartphone, and somehow a dirt bike. My mom's explanation was that Kevin needed more because he appreciates things differently. I still do not know what that means. I'm pretty sure I would have appreciated a gaming console differently than a set of socket wrenches. Earth Days followed the same pattern. Kevin's parties were events. Rented venues, catered food, all his friends invited. My birthdays were an afterthought. "Do you even want a party this year?" my mom would ask every year, making it clear that the answer she wanted was no. By the time I was 14, I had stopped expecting anything and just told them not to bother. Easier to have no expectations than to be disappointed again. My dad was always Kevin's biggest cheerleader. Every mediocre achievement got celebrated like Kevin had cured cancer. Kevin made junior varsity soccer as a sophomore. Dad threw a party. Kevin graduated high school with a 2.1 grade point average. Dad cried actual tears of pride. When I graduated salutatorian and got a full academic scholarship to Ohio State, my dad patted me on the shoulder and said, "Good job," before asking if I had seen Kevin's new sneakers. I stood there with a full ride to a major university, and my dad was more interested in footwear. The thing about being the unfavored kid is you learn to stop expecting anything. You stop hoping your parents will show up to your events. You stop waiting for someone to notice your accomplishments. You just put your head down and handle your business because nobody else will. That is what I did. I worked part-time jobs through high school, saved every penny, and counted down the days until I could escape. Every shift I worked was another step toward independence. I had a job bagging groceries at 14, then moved up to stocking shelves. By 16, I was working at a local hardware store where the old-timers taught me practical skills, plumbing basics, electrical fundamentals, how to fix things instead of just replacing them. Those guys showed me more attention in 2 years than my parents had shown in 16. One of them, this retired plumber named Carl, told me I had a good head and good hands, and that I would go far if I kept my nose clean. That single comment meant more to me than anything my parents ever said. College was my ticket out, and I grabbed it with both hands. 4 years of engineering, graduated with honors, landed a solid job at a manufacturing plant as a mechanical engineer. While Kevin was busy bouncing between minimum wage jobs and asking our parents for loans that everyone knew were just gifts, I was building an actual life. Real career, real savings, real future. By 25, I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every mortgage payment was a reminder that I had done this myself. No handouts from mom and dad. No loans that magically never needed repayment. Just years of hard work and careful planning. The day I signed those closing documents was one of the best days of my life. I had something that was entirely mine, built entirely on my own effort. Kevin's life, meanwhile, was a revolving door of disasters. He could not hold a job for more than 6 months. He would get fired for showing up late, for having attitude problems, for creative differences with management at a fast food restaurant. The excuses were always creative, I will give him that. Never once was anything his fault. The manager was on a power trip. The schedule was unreasonable. The job was beneath him anyway. Always something external causing his problems, never anything internal. Kevin's housing history reads like a comedy of errors, except nobody is laughing. Eviction number 1 happened when he was 24. He had rented a studio apartment and stopped paying rent after 3 months because he disagreed with the landlord's energy. I do not know what that means either. The landlord had the audacity to ask for rent on time, apparently, and Kevin found that aggressive. My parents paid off his back rent and let him move home. That first homecoming lasted about 8 months. Kevin did nothing productive the entire time. No job search, no skill building, just gaming until 4 o'clock in the morning and sleeping until noon. My parents complained about it to each other, but never actually addressed it with Kevin. He's recovering from a difficult experience, my mom would say. A difficult experience of not paying bills. What a trauma. Eviction number 2 came at 27. He had moved in with a girlfriend who eventually realized she was basically supporting a grown man who played video games 14 hours a day. Her name was Ashley. Nice girl from what I could tell. Way too good for Kevin. She worked 2 jobs while Kevin contributed nothing but complaints about how tired she always looked. When she finally had enough and kicked him out, he owed her 3 months of utility bills. My parents covered those too and welcomed their precious boy back home. The second homecoming was even worse. Kevin had developed an attitude about it like he was doing our parents a favor by gracing them with his presence. He would eat their food, use their utilities, contribute nothing to household upkeep, and then complain about the quality of the groceries my mom bought. These aren't the right chips, he would say, like a $40 a week food mooch gets to have preferences. Eviction number 3 happened just last year, when he was 30. He had somehow convinced a buddy named Trevor to let him crash at his place rent-free in exchange for helping with chores. Turns out, Kevin's definition of helping with chores was eating all the food and never cleaning anything. Trevor had given him a simple arrangement: keep the common areas clean, take out the trash, basic stuff. Kevin could not even manage that. The buddy gave him 2 weeks to leave. Kevin stretched it to 2 months until the guy literally changed the locks while Kevin was out. Each time, my parents acted like Kevin was some victim of circumstance. Bad luck, wrong place, wrong time, the economy, anything and everything except the obvious truth that Kevin was a lazy mooch who had never learned consequences because they had protected him from every single one. The mental gymnastics they performed to avoid holding Kevin accountable could have won Olympic medals. After eviction number 3, Kevin moved back home again. My parents were in their late 50s by this point, supposedly planning for retirement. And here was their 30-year-old son camped out in his childhood bedroom like nothing had changed since high school. They would complain about it to me during our rare phone calls. Kevin is having a hard time. Kevin just needs to find his path. Kevin would thrive if he just got the right opportunity. The opportunities Kevin actually needed were basic life skills and a wake-up call. But that was not something my parents were equipped to provide. They had spent 3 decades making sure Kevin never had to grow up, and now they were shocked that he had not. Shocked, I tell you. I stayed out of it mostly. Sent a card on holidays, called on birthdays, visited maybe twice a year for awkward dinners where Kevin would inevitably ask to borrow money, and I would inevitably say no. My relationship with my family was cordial but distant, which honestly suited me fine. I had made peace with who they were a long time ago. About 8 months ago, my parents dropped a bombshell during one of our rare family dinners. They were selling the family house and downsizing to a condo in Arizona. They wanted to be closer to my mom's sister and enjoy their retirement years in the Sunshine Phoenix area, apparently desert living for their golden years. On the surface, this sounded completely reasonable. They were in their late 50s, the house was too big for 2 people, Arizona made sense for the climate and family connections. I actually congratulated them. Seemed like a solid retirement plan. Good weather, family nearby, lower cost of living. Then the other shoe dropped hard. So obviously Kevin will need somewhere to stay, my mom said casually, like she was discussing the weather. We thought, since you have that extra bedroom, he could move in with you temporarily, just until he gets back on his feet. I nearly choked on my water. My extra bedrooms were a home office where I did freelance consulting work and a guest room I used maybe 3 times a year for actual guests. Neither of those was a Kevin storage facility. The office especially was important for my side income, which brought in an extra $15,000 a year. I was not about to convert it into a bedroom for my perpetually unemployed brother. That's not going to work for me, I said, probably too quickly. My dad's face did that thing it always did when I did not immediately comply with the family agenda. A mix of confusion and irritation, like he could not quite compute that I had my own opinions about my own house. Why not? You have the space. Having space and wanting a roommate are 2 different things. Kevin and I do not exactly have a compatible lifestyle. By which I meant I actually paid my bills and maintained basic hygiene standards, but I was trying to be diplomatic. Kevin was sitting across from me scrolling through his phone like this conversation about his entire living situation did not concern him. Classic Kevin. Let everyone else figure out his problems while he checked social media, probably looking at memes while his housing future was being discussed. It would only be temporary, my mom insisted. 6 months, maybe a year, just until Kevin saves up enough for his own place. 6 months to a year. Right. Kevin had lived rent-free with our parents for the better part of a decade across multiple stints and had never managed to save anything. The idea that he would suddenly develop financial discipline in my house was laughable. The man had never saved a dime in his life. Any money he got went straight to video games, food delivery, and whatever other immediate gratification he wanted. I'm sorry, but no, I'm not in a position to take on a roommate. I used corporate speak because I had learned that direct honesty with my parents just led to arguments. Soft language sometimes bought more time. The dinner got awkward after that. My parents kept circling back to the topic, trying different angles. It would be so good for Kevin to be around a positive influence. It would help me too, because Kevin could help around the house. The mental image of Kevin helping around my house almost made me laugh out loud. This was a guy who once went 3 weeks without doing laundry because he kept forgetting. He would help around my house like a tornado helps around a mobile home park. I held firm. No meant no. When I left that night, my parents looked at me like I had personally betrayed them. Kevin just shrugged and went back to his phone. Typical. My parents moved to Arizona about 4 months ago. They had found Kevin a small apartment near their old house and paid his first 3 months of rent plus the security deposit, a going-away present. They called it a final helping hand to get him started. You can probably guess what happened next. Kevin lasted exactly 2.5 months before getting evicted again. This time it was for noise complaints, property damage, and failure to pay rent once my parents' prepaid months ran out. The landlord documented everything meticulously. Kevin had apparently been hosting loud gatherings multiple nights a week, keeping neighbors awake until 3 o'clock in the morning. He had somehow put a hole in the bathroom wall, claimed it was already weak, and he had barely touched it. The landlord had photos showing a fist-sized hole that definitely was not there during the move-in inspection. My parents called me the day Kevin got his eviction notice. My mom was practically hysterical on the phone, going on about how Kevin had nowhere to go and how he would end up on the streets if someone did not help him. My dad took over and used his serious voice, the one he probably thought commanded respect, but really just sounded constipated. "You need to let Kevin stay with you," he said. Not asked, told. "No," I said simply. "He's your brother. He's family. This is what family does. Family does not mean I have to let someone move into my house against my wishes. Kevin is 31 years old. He needs to figure out his own living situation." My mom grabbed the phone back. "How can you be so cold after everything we have done for you?" That one almost made me laugh. Everything they had done for me, the years of favoritism, the lack of support, the constant reminders that I was the lesser son. What exactly had they done for me, besides occasionally remember I existed? I could count on one hand the meaningful things they had contributed to my life, and most of those fingers would stay down. I'm not being cold, I'm being realistic. Kevin has been evicted 4 times. He does not pay rent. He damages property. That's not someone I want living in my house. The call devolved into accusations and guilt trips. I was abandoning family. I was being selfish. I was punishing Kevin for making mistakes. As if destroying rental properties and refusing to pay for housing were just whoopsie-daisies that anyone could make. As if 4 evictions in 7 years was just a string of bad luck. I ended the call by saying my answer was final, and I was not going to discuss it further. Then I blocked their numbers for 48 hours because I needed a mental break. Over the next few weeks, they tried everything. Flying monkeys in the form of distant relatives I had not spoken to in years suddenly started calling to tell me how disappointed they were in me. My aunt texted me a Bible verse about brotherly love. A cousin I had met maybe twice tried to friend me on social media, presumably to continue the guilt campaign. Even my grandmother, who I genuinely loved, called to gently suggest that family helps family. I explained the situation, and she actually seemed to understand, though she still encouraged me to keep my heart open. Kevin himself called a few times. His approach was different, less guilt, more promises. He had changed. He would learn from his mistakes. He would get a job immediately. He would pay rent. He would be the perfect housemate. I would barely know he was there. Right. The guy who could not keep a job for 6 months was going to suddenly transform into a model tenant. I was not buying it. I said no. Every single time, I said no. My house, my rules, my decision. Kevin could figure out his own situation like every other adult on the planet. About 6 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail that made me actually laugh out loud. It was from a law office I'd never heard of, informing me that my parents were considering legal action against me for familial abandonment and breach of implied familial duty. I had to read it 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. My parents were threatening to sue me because I would not let my adult brother live in my house. This could not be real. The letter was written on official letterhead with fancy fonts and legal jargon, but the substance was pure delusion. I called a lawyer friend from college to get his take. He was equally baffled. Familial abandonment is not really a thing in civil law, he explained. At least, not in the way they were describing. There is no legal obligation to house adult siblings. This sounds like someone either gave them very bad legal advice or they found a lawyer willing to take their money for a case that is going nowhere. He suggested I respond formally through an attorney to make it clear I was not intimidated. So I hired a lawyer of my own. Nothing fancy, just a local guy named Richard who handled general civil matters. He sent a response letter that basically said, there is no legal basis for these claims, and any lawsuit would be frivolous. I figured that would be the end of it. Normal people would realize they had no case and drop the whole thing. But my parents were not normal people. They were people who had spent 30 years refusing to accept that their golden child had any flaws, and they were not about to start accepting reality now. 2 weeks later, I got served with actual court papers. My parents were suing me for $50,000 in damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress and negligent failure to provide familial support. The claims were completely bonkers. They alleged that my refusal to house Kevin had caused them severe emotional trauma and had forced them to incur significant financial expenses to support Kevin themselves. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. They had been supporting Kevin his entire life. They had enabled every bad decision, covered every consequence, and protected him from every failure. But somehow, my refusal to continue their pattern of enabling was causing them emotional distress. My lawyer reviewed the complaint and confirmed what I already suspected. This is nonsense. There is no cause of action here. They are basically suing you for not being generous enough with your personal property. No judge is going to entertain this. But we still had to respond. We still had to go through the motions, and that meant actually going to court. The discovery process was illuminating. My lawyer requested documents from my parents related to their claims, including financial records showing the significant expenses they had supposedly incurred because of my actions. What we got back was a gold mine. First, there were bank statements showing that my parents had been funneling money to Kevin for years, not just during emergencies, but regularly. Monthly transfers of $500, $800, sometimes $1,200. This had been going on for at least the past 5 years, based on the records they provided. Kevin was not just occasionally asking for help. He was basically on their payroll. Over 5 years, they had given him roughly $45,000, maybe more. That is a down payment on a house. That is a master's degree. That is seed money for a business. Instead, it went to funding Kevin's extended adolescence. Second, there were emails between my parents discussing their retirement plan. And this is where things got really interesting. In these emails, they openly talked about how they expected me to take over Kevin's support once they moved to Arizona. They discussed how my house had plenty of room and how I was financially stable enough to handle the burden. They even calculated how much money they would save if Kevin was living with me instead of in his own apartment. One email from my mom to my dad literally said, "Once he's settled at his brother's place, we can finally stop worrying about the monthly payments." They were not suing me because they were emotionally devastated. They were suing me because I disrupted their plan to make me financially responsible for their adult son. This lawsuit was not about familial duty. It was about money. Cold, calculated money. My lawyer was practically giddy when he showed me these documents. He said, "This shows their motivation was financial, not emotional. They wanted to transfer Kevin's living expenses to you, and when you refused, they tried to force you through legal action." We prepared our defense accordingly. We documented Kevin's eviction history. We gathered testimony from his former landlords about property damage and unpaid rent. One landlord sent a detailed statement describing how Kevin had left the apartment in such bad condition that it cost $3,000 to make it rentable again. We compiled evidence of his employment history, showing he rarely held a job longer than a few months. We built a picture of exactly why any reasonable person would refuse to house him. My lawyer also sent interrogatories to my parents, asking them to specify exactly what familial duty they believed I had violated, and to cite any legal precedent for their claims. Their responses were vague and mostly just repeated the same emotional arguments. They could not point to a single law or legal principle that required me to house my adult brother. The whole thing was clearly going nowhere, but my parents refused to drop it. They had committed to this course of action, and their pride would not let them back down. Classic. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning in early fall. I took the day off work and showed up in my best business casual, looking like the responsible adult I had worked my whole life to become. My parents were already there with Kevin, sitting on the opposite side of the courtroom. My mom would not even look at me. My dad glared like I had personally offended his ancestors. Kevin was on his phone, obviously. Their lawyer was this older guy who looked like he had maybe checked out of his career about a decade ago and was just coasting until retirement. Not exactly the legal dream team. He shuffled papers around and kept checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. The judge was a non-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked like she had seen every possible type of family drama and was thoroughly tired of all of it. When she reviewed the case file before proceedings began, I caught her raising an eyebrow. Not a great sign for my parents. My parents' lawyer went first, laying out their case with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. He talked about familial bonds and moral obligations, and the trauma of watching a family member turn their back on blood. It was heavy on emotion and extremely light on actual legal arguments. He never once cited a specific statute or precedent that required me to house Kevin. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He was methodical and precise. He explained that there was no legal requirement for an adult to provide housing to an adult sibling. He presented Kevin's eviction history, the property damage, the pattern of not paying rent. He showed the judge the emails where my parents discussed their plan to transfer Kevin's financial burden to me. Your Honor, my lawyer said, the plaintiffs are not seeking justice for emotional harm. They are seeking to compel my client to assume financial responsibility for another adult. There is no legal basis for this claim. This lawsuit is an attempt to use the court system to circumvent my client's right to determine who lives in his own home. The judge looked unimpressed with my parents' case. She asked their lawyer directly, "Can you cite any legal authority that obligates a person to provide housing to an adult sibling?" Their lawyer stammered something about common law traditions and the spirit of family unity. The judge was clearly not buying it. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge decided she wanted to hear from Kevin directly. This made sense since he was the person at the center of the entire dispute. Kevin was sworn in and took a seat in the witness box, looking annoyed that he had to put down his phone for 5 minutes. My parents' lawyer asked Kevin some softball questions. How long had he been looking for stable housing? What were his plans for employment? How had my refusal to help affected him? Kevin's answers were predictably Kevin. He had been exploring options. He was between opportunities job-wise. My refusal had really hurt because he thought I was supposed to have his back. Then my lawyer got his turn. He started with Kevin's eviction history, walking through each one methodically. Kevin tried to minimize and deflect, but the documentation was clear. 4 evictions. Property damage. Unpaid rent. The pattern was undeniable. Then my lawyer asked the question that blew the whole case wide open. Kevin, where are you currently living? Kevin shrugged. With my buddy Dave. He's letting me crash on his couch until this gets sorted out. So you are not homeless. You are not living on the streets as your parents claimed in their filing. Kevin actually looked confused by the question. No, I've been at Dave's place for like 2 months now. It's fine. The judge's eyebrows went up. My parents' lawyer looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. My lawyer continued, "And what do you understand to be the purpose of this lawsuit? Why are your parents suing your brother?" Kevin shrugged again. I mean, it's pretty simple. My parents are on a fixed income now, and they can't keep paying for my stuff. They figured if they got the court to make my brother take me in, they would save like $1,000 a month or whatever. Plus, my brother's got that house, and he's not even using all the rooms, so it's kind of a waste anyway. The courtroom went dead silent. Kevin had just admitted under oath that the entire lawsuit was a financial scheme. Not about emotional distress, not about family duty, just about transferring his living expenses from my parents to me. My parents looked horrified. Their lawyer closed his eyes like he was praying for the sweet release of death. The judge looked like she was simultaneously annoyed and almost amused by the sheer audacity of it all. So let me make sure I understand, the judge said slowly. Your parents filed this lawsuit because they wanted to save money by having your brother assume your living expenses? Kevin nodded like this was completely reasonable. Yeah, pretty much. They said they couldn't afford to keep helping me out and that my brother had plenty of money to take over. Something about fair share of the family burden or whatever. I could have hugged my brother in that moment. After 31 years of his nonsense causing me nothing but trouble, he had finally done something useful. He had torpedoed my parents' entire case with his own inability to keep his mouth shut. The judge called a brief recess. When we reconvened, she did not waste any time. I've heard enough, she said. The plaintiffs have failed to establish any legal basis for their claims. There is no law that requires an adult to provide housing to an adult sibling. The claims of emotional distress are clearly pretextual, given the testimony that the real motivation was financial. She looked directly at my parents. What I find particularly troubling is the attempt to use this court to force one family member to assume financial responsibility for another. That is not what the legal system is for. Your son, she gestured toward me, has every right to decide who lives in his own home. The fact that your other son is family does not override that right. She dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning they could not refile. She also ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, since the lawsuit had been frivolous. The total came to about $8,000. Not a fortune, but a meaningful amount for people who claimed they could not afford to support Kevin anymore. My mom was crying as they left the courtroom. My dad looked like he wanted to hit something. Kevin was already back on his phone, apparently unbothered by the fact that his testimony had just cost his parents thousands of dollars. I walked out of there feeling lighter than I had in months. It has been about 3 weeks since the court date, and things have gotten interesting. First, my parents sent a letter demanding I waive the legal fee award. The letter was 4 pages long, handwritten by my mom, full of guilt trips about how they were on a fixed income and could not afford this. She mentioned their mortgage. She mentioned their car payments. She mentioned how much they had spent on Kevin over the years, like that was somehow my fault. The letter ended with, "We're still your parents, and we deserve your respect." I forwarded it to my lawyer without responding. He sent back a formal response that the judgment stands and payment is expected within 30 days. They missed the deadline, did not pay a dime. My lawyer filed a motion to enforce, and the court granted it. They now have a garnishment order on my dad's pension until the $8,000 is paid off, about $450 per month automatically deducted. My mom called screaming about how I was stealing from their retirement. She was so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She called me ungrateful. She called me cold. She said I was destroying the family. I waited until she paused for breath and reminded her that she could have avoided this by not suing me in the first place. She hung up. Second, Kevin got kicked out of Dave's place. Lasted almost 3 months, which is actually a record for him. Dave found out about the eviction history from someone at the courthouse who knew someone who knew someone. He gave Kevin 1 week to leave. Kevin called me asking for just a few nights while he figured things out. I said no. He called me a bunch of names and hung up. Third, My grandmother called. She had heard the whole story from my aunt, who had heard it from my mom's dramatic retelling. Grandma wanted my side. I told her everything, including the emails where my parents planned to dump Kevin on me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she was disappointed in my father for how he had raised Kevin and how he treated me. She told me she had tried to warn them years ago about the enabling. Nobody listened. Fourth, Kevin showed up at my house. Just appeared on my doorstep last Tuesday night around 9 p.m. with a duffel bag, looking pathetic and wet from the rain. He said he had nowhere else to go. His buddy Dave had given him the boot. He had tried our parents, but they were still in Arizona. He had even called Ashley, the ex-girlfriend, who laughed and hung up on him. I stood in the doorway and told him that was not my problem. He started yelling, called me every name in the book, said I was supposed to be his brother, said blood was supposed to mean something, said I owed him because I got all the good genes and had it easy. That last part almost made me laugh. A neighbor poked his head out to see what the commotion was. I waved to let him know everything was fine. Kevin noticed and lowered his voice, but his face was still red with anger. He tried a different approach, begging. Said he would sleep on the porch if he had to. Said he just needed one night to figure things out. Said he would be gone by morning. I told him no and closed the door. He started banging on it. I called the non-emergency police line to document the incident in case he tried anything. He must have seen me through the window because he grabbed his bag and left before they arrived. The officer who showed up took my statement and suggested I get a Ring doorbell camera. I ordered one that night. Fifth, my parents flew back from Arizona. They are staying at a motel near their old house, trying to help Kevin get back on his feet. My mom called to tell me this, like I was supposed to feel guilty. I asked her how the retirement condo was working out. She said they might have to sell it to cover Kevin's expenses. I said that sounded like a personal problem. She called me heartless and hung up. Sixth, I got a promotion at work. Senior engineer position with a 15% raise. I found out the same day Kevin got kicked out of Dave's place. Sometimes timing is just perfect. Last weekend, everything came to a head. My parents showed up at my house unannounced. Both of them, plus Kevin, standing on my front porch like some kind of intervention squad. They had driven all night from their motel to catch me before I left for work Saturday morning. My dad was holding a folder of papers. My mom had been crying. Mascara streaked down her face. Kevin just looked annoyed to be there, probably because someone had woken him up before noon. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I was not letting them inside. The new Ring doorbell was recording everything, which I made sure to point out. My dad launched into a speech he had clearly rehearsed in the car. Family and responsibility, blood being thicker than water, how I was tearing everyone apart with my selfishness. He said they had brought documents showing their financial situation, bank statements, bills, spreadsheets showing how much they had spent on Kevin over the year. He wanted me to see how much they had sacrificed. He said if I just agreed to let Kevin stay for 6 months, maybe a year, they could get back on track. They could save the Arizona condo. They could retire in peace. My mom chimed in between sobs. She talked about how she had carried me for 9 months, how she had stayed up with me when I was sick, how she had driven me to school every day. She made it sound like basic parenting was some kind of extraordinary favor that I owed her for the rest of my life. Kevin stood there scrolling through his phone, completely checked out from the conversation that was literally about his future. I let them finish. It took about 10 minutes. Did not interrupt once. Then I asked one question. Did you bring any documents showing what you sacrificed for me? My dad opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at my mom. She looked at the ground. Kevin actually laughed. Dude, seriously. I ignored him and kept my eyes on my parents. I told them this was the last conversation we were going to have about Kevin's living situation. I was not going to house him. I was not going to fund him. I was not going to bail him out, ever. If they wanted to keep enabling a 31-year-old man who could not hold a job or pay rent, that was their choice. But they were not going to make it my problem. Not through guilt, not through manipulation, and definitely not through the legal system. My mom started crying harder. Those heaving sobs that used to make me feel terrible as a kid did not work anymore. Kevin rolled his eyes and muttered something about me being such a tool. Then he said something under his breath about how I had always been the difficult one. Coming from him, that was almost funny. My dad's face turned that familiar shade of red. He started to say something about how I would regret this, how I would be alone when I was old, how nobody would be there for me because I was not there for family. I cut him off. I told them they could either accept my decision and we could have some kind of relationship going forward, or they could keep pushing and I would cut contact entirely. No more calls, no more letters, no more showing up at my house. Their choice. Final offer. My dad threw the folder on the ground. Papers scattered across my porch. Bank statements, bills, all that documentation he had wanted me to see. He stormed back to the car without picking any of it up. My mom followed, still crying, shooting me a look that was supposed to make me feel guilty. Kevin flipped me off and walked away, already back on his phone before he reached the car. They peeled out of my driveway like they were in some kind of drama movie. I picked up the folder and all the scattered papers, went inside, and threw the whole thing in the recycling without looking at any of it. That was 5 days ago. Haven't heard from any of them since. My house is quiet. My savings are intact. My promotion starts next month. Got a date next weekend with a woman from my gym who laughed when I told her the abbreviated version of this story.